Dear friends, I'm glad to meet you all again. It's Friday, 3rd of June. It's 8 p.m., 5 minutes past 8 p.m. and Kiev time and Moscow time, and we have Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and we're calling this show Resistance. Good evening, everybody. We have over 10,000 people watching us live. I have a request for everyone watching it. Please share links, post them on your social media, and subscribe to our channels. Svetlana, we wanted to talk to you for a while already, and we have a pretty friendly audience here that is asking questions. But let me ask you several most important ones that I have lined up. I wanted to ask you, it's been about 2 years since the elections of 2020. Can we say that during this period some things became more obvious for you? After these 2 years, that perhaps something should have been done differently? Or perhaps you would have refused the mission that fell on your shoulders because it's not too easy? What would you say? I always say that I'm grateful to my life. There is no would be, could be in life. You can overthink things. How would one thing go or the other thing go? But what is done is done. I made my choice when I submitted my documents, my candidacy for presidency, when my husband was arrested by regime. We were very inexperienced in organizing these mass protests. Perhaps we lacked coordination. We could have been ready more, but perhaps we were not expecting that this will lead to such a massive protest. Because when people live under dictatorship for over 27 years, the hopes are slowly extinguished. And then we believed in ourselves, and it seemed that with thousands of people on our side, protesting, going outside, we'll be able to topple that regime. But we undervalued Lukashenko's determinism to keep power by all means necessary, killing and torturing people. So, Svetlana, it is a common thing with authoritarian regimes. They put your husband in jail for 18 years. I'm quite sure they're probably blackmailing you to sit tight, otherwise he will be executed. He's basically a hostage for the next 18 or somewhat years. What is the right choice here? What is your choice here? Because the life of your husband is directly linked to your behavior and to their blackmail of you. You know how it works. I probably shouldn't be telling you the details. You know more than I do. Well, actually, nobody said exactly these words to me, but they mean it. They mean it by other means of communication, indicating that if you continue to push against the power of Belarus regime, your husband will suffer. There are thousands more people, however, being kept hostages. There are thousands of families waiting for mothers and fathers to come home. So I don't have a single goal to free Sergei Tikhanovsky, my husband, and I'm not interested in anybody else. Of course not. Everybody needs to be freed. All the political detainees must be free. We just don't have an option to stop and say, okay, we're exhausted, we're not continuing the struggle. Those people are in jail and they sacrifice their freedom so we can continue fighting. Continue the fight of those who've been jailed. So we have to continue going without stopping and going over blackmail and backstabbing, and the amount of dirt being published about me. You basically wake up every day with the thought, how are people doing? How are they sleeping there? They're sleeping without blankets, without pillows. They're pouring bleach into their cameras to make their breathing intolerable. They're moving them to new locations so they feel themselves insignificant and on the lowest rank in the prison cell. But we don't stop, we continue. Well, look, Svetlana, Solzhenitsyn, he had several letters. In 1974 he was arrested, and then he was exiled. It was a mighty story, kind of doomed. And there was one letter, I think it was called "The Calf was headbutting the oak tree." And he wrote there that if I have to sacrifice my people for the fight with the regime, and he understood it as a sacred fight against communism, he basically resigned there and said that if it comes to that, well, let it be. These predators will eat my children. There is no way I can stop. So, in your case, it did touch you in person. Your husband is in prison, but you also have been touched with the same force, same regime, where they basically extradite you by force, the legally elected president. What if they threaten your kids? What did you do? Like Solzhenitsyn, would you say, I don't care, you can kill them, and then there's no reason to kill them, or would you do something else? And you're also a mother, right? Well, first of all, I am a mother, and children for any woman, any mother, are a holy thing. I do not even want to think about such a choice. I hope this matter never is never risen between the government and any other mother. But another question, do you want to take revenge on those people who were beaten and killing people during the August protests? We generally hate violence here, but very often revenge is a strong weapon for satisfaction. I do not quite know what do you mean by the word take revenge. We do want to build a legally sound country where people have rights and where laws matter. But those people who were beating, raping, and killing Belarusians, they need to be judged by an honest and unbiased court on their action. So, look, right now there is a discussion about Lukashenko trying to pull troops to the border. I personally think it's a decoration, although I may be wrong. But how do you look at this? That he perhaps has plans to participate in the conflict by attacking Ukraine from the north? You know, I think that these war games, this clanging of tanks, it is an attempt to draw attention to his person, to state that he's an important one, that people have to consider him, and he's really pissed when people call him Putin's puppet. But he also understands that he's got no forces to fight with. Our army is not ready, neither morally nor technically. And I'm basing my judgment on the expert's opinion that we perhaps have about 10,000 people who are ready to go on because they do not quite realize the meaning of war. But most of the army contingent, they do not understand why do they need to fight and kill our neighbors, Ukrainians, to whom most of us have very fond feelings just for the ambitions of one dictator. Here Lukashenko needs to show his importance and how loyal he is to the Putin's regime, but I don't think it will lead to any real attack, any real offensive from Belarus. When there was such a threat at the beginning of war, Belarus mothers joined the fray internally in Belarus, and they were calling upon their sons and husbands and on soldiers, and they were basically telling that if the government forces you, because government can force a soldier, then the moment you cross the border, surrender and join Ukrainian army, because you are the face of our army. Lukashenko is already a collaborationist for Putin, but us Belarusians, we need to show that we made our moral choice and we are on the side of Ukraine. We are on the side of peace, and we do want to keep friendly relations with Ukraine in the future. So we do have information that such an order was given by a regime, but higher-ranking officers understood real well that soldiers are demoralized and they have no desire to even cross the border. So this order was never delivered below the top officials of the army. So that's interesting. Do you have any channels in Belarus army who might be giving you some information? I just mean that, some people, if anything happens, they might rather easily switch to your side and your supporters and help you take over the regime. Does that exist? Or I'm wrong? Well, me personally, I do not have these contacts, but we do have military experts who have a way to get insights and inner knowledge from the army. And you were saying that they can join our side, but it is difficult. What I want to tell you is that fear that was cultivated for 27 years, it exists. Many people in the bureaucracy and among military and police, they do support good changes. They do want to live in a normal country where presidents change, where people take responsibility for how they develop. But they don't see an exit point out of this system. Even if one of them leaves the country or finds a way to go, they still have families, they have relatives, and the government these days do not stop in front of any obstacles. They will find relatives and they will take their revenge. So I just hope that when it becomes very clear that regime is as weak as never, there will be people who are or who will not follow the command and perhaps pull a battalion or whatever their detachment on our side, on the opposition side. I'm not a military expert. I'm not a military authority for these structures. They need somebody with experience and with background who can lead them. We have such people, and we already are establishing these connections with the army and resistance, but for now it is very underground. All right, got it. There are 25,000 people watching us, so I request all of you to come watch it and share links, and it's very important for this cast to be seen in Belarus as well, so please make an effort to send it to your friends over there. And do not forget to leave your like. So, in Ukrainian army, there is actually a detachment, detachment named after Tikhanovsky, and they're also a fully Belarus detachment. These are people from Belarus who defected to Ukraine, changed their allegiance. And the existence of such a battalion, it kind of creates an opportunity for switching the war with Belarus onto military tracks. Now, what do you think? What role would that group of insurgents, oppositioners, dissidents, however you can call them, do you think they will play a role in Belarus? Because that's a lot of people. That could be up to 1,000 people, 1,000 war fighters who risk their lives on a battlefield and who might want to have satisfaction and might want to reach Minsk. Is there a way to help them, or is there a way for them to help you? Before I answer this question, you mentioned that it's very important for this cast to be watched in Belarus. It is very important for me that we are heard in Ukraine as well, because when the war started and Belarus all of a sudden became a co-aggressor in this war, if we had rather friendly relations before that, the attitude towards Belarusian changed immediately. I do want to address Ukrainian audience. Please segregate Lukashenko's criminal regime from the usual people of Belarus. And I apologize, I have to take a sidestep here with the story. I'm currently at the forum GlobSec, and I was stopped by a woman from the Ukrainian delegation, and she addressed me as you Belarusians, you aggressors. And I was trying to explain to her that we're trying to help you as much as we can. You do not realize how difficult are the repressions in the country. And she was of the opinion that only our partisans are heroes who are stopping the trains. Everybody else are just sitting and doing nothing. So it's important for me to bring it to Ukrainians that please do not take Belarus people as aggressors. We are not. It is Lukashenko and his regime that are positioning us against Ukraine. And you also need to understand there is a detachment of Tikhanovsky, a detachment Pagonia, Pursuit, and there is a group in Odessa. And now these are just the ones that we know that are participating in some shape in the power structures. But there are also other groups, volunteer groups that are helping different groups of people. And Belarus diaspora is supporting our battalions quite well. And they are protecting not just Ukraine, they're also protecting the attitude and our relations with Belarus. Many of them left everything in their country to go and help Ukraine. We have stories that people who were in jail for a certain amount of time for going out against the regime in 2020, they are fighting on the side of Ukraine now. Perhaps this is how they want to take revenge on Lukashenko later. I'm not quite sure about their motivations, but we Belarus people understand, and the people fighting understand, that they're not only protecting the future of Ukraine, but also the future of Belarus. I don't know how the events will unfold and what role will Belarus people play, the ones that are gaining their experience on the battlefields of Ukraine, and what role will they play in toppling the regime in Belarus and freeing our country. But one can say that the regime is really afraid of them, because all that creation of special groups within the army of Belarus is aimed at basically protecting Lukashenko from possible opposition in the army. So the regime is under constant pressure and they start making mistakes. But however, it's probably too early to say how it will act, perhaps at the end of war. But right now, the task for these detachments is to defend Ukraine. All right, next question. How do you see in general the situation? Let's imagine it's the end of the war. We don't know how long it will go for. There probably will be some stages in it. We are already seeing some phases. And the fact that Lukashenko regime did participate in aggression as the third country, although Belarus people did not participate in direct military activities with Ukrainians, Belarus as a country did partake in being a base for missiles shot and a base for the jet fighters to go out and attack Ukrainians. So, what do you think? If there was a chance to go take revenge on Lukashenko, what if Ukraine itself, after this war, at some point would want to assist in toppling the criminal regime in Minsk? Would you see the flow of events unfolding this way? And what would be the role of Belarus opposition? And you, as the elected president, but not allowed to take any control and exiled? Well, I want to say then we should be building context right now. We should not be building, we should not be waiting for the end of war. What touched me in your phrase is in the case if Ukraine wins. But it might have different meanings. Well, I understand, but it's important that without free Belarus, there will always be a threat for Ukraine and other neighbors. So you mean it needs to be solved? Yes, and it needs to be solved right now. One should not have any commercial treaties with Lukashenko regime. Join the sanctions pressure onto Lukashenko regime, and generally we should have been doing it when we've been praying and asking for the change in this world. And very often dictators are absolutely incapable of any political foresight, and it's just the economic situation and physical force that may push them to review certain stances. Now, myself personally, I cannot prognosticate what would be the way that this regime in Belarus will fall apart. And we also have a mission of helping to tell the people that we have not stopped. We continue fighting. And, if Ukraine at some point will realize that their help is needed in Belarus to help topple Lukashenko's regime, we'll be really thankful for you. So, let's say Lukashenko sends his people to Europe to try to get some support from other regimes. For Belarus, it's kind of, or can be referred to as industrial smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of lying and trying to push your agenda. What would be the perspective here? Do you think his emissaries will be believed in Europe? Or do you think Europe will believe him if the West will continue their support to Ukraine, that he might become the victim of such a attitude by Europe and the collective West to his destiny? And how can he prevent that situation from happening? All right, it is the destiny of the whole country that is at stake here. And in reality, it is due to the thankless work of Belarus people that was part of. Since 2020, we got a lot of support from our Western partners on the political level. And I think the next time these things will not really go well, because Lukashenko is still not considered to be legitimate president after the 2020 election. Belarus people joined the effort as never. They were out in the streets marching and protesting, and there are people sending letters to EU, basically telling them that we are also the victims. We have not participated in any of the military actions in Ukraine, but the position is rather strict on this matter. And it's understandable here that representatives of that pro-regime Belarus should be cancelled from all the international meetings and not accepted as representatives. There is now an alternative Belarus being built by those people who detest the current regime, who help us to build the online and offline connections, and there are people among them who are focused on the future development. And I want to say that now the eyes are quite open towards Lukashenko and the neighboring dictatorship country, so people of the world can realize what was happening in Belarus in 2020. And I'm getting a lot of support from peoples of the world, and there are many people pledging their allegiance and promising to help with anything as long as they can. But another question about diasporas, about the expats living abroad. Do they partake in your protests? Beyond the borders of Belarus itself, which is sort of under internal occupation, people do take you as the leader of the nation. Because I think, on the one hand, it's acknowledging that this is the reality, and General West are approving and supporting their current stance that you are a legitimate president of Belarus. Do you think you guys can form a fully proper functioning shadow government of Belarus right now? Because many people are blaming you for some basic sandplay, but even in the situation you were in Belarus, you managed to get the overall country support. Because you could create a shadow government, you can appoint certain people to their posts, people with experience, with the military experience, so to maybe realize a certain aspect of this equation. You know, back in the day, I received a lot of critique. Let's stop it, announce yourself to be a president. But it is not important how you call yourself. Would you form an exiled government? Or would it be just a structure with a fancy name that will not have a proper outcome? So, if you can do something for your country, understanding that people voted for you, knowing all your drawbacks, and putting all these labels, president or not, the fact that Lukashenko did secret innovation, he did not become a full-force legitimate president with the people. So, these structures that can provide certain pressure to the regime, that they exist. Right now we're working to develop a government in exile, not exactly to call it that way, but we are figuring that structure. This is a process. In 2020, I did not feel like putting any labels on these structures. We did not want to be in exile, because back then we believed that it might take a month or 2 or 3 and we'll be back home and we'll be building Belarus again inside the country. However, it appears that the process is a long one, and the reforms that new Belarus will need, they're already being written out. Our specialists are writing them out. We got really smart people writing them out in different branches of economy. There is constitutional reform being worked. It doesn't quite make sense to call it a government. It doesn't matter how you call it. And we're more of a coalition that works together despite all the attempts of the regime to break us apart and separate us and make us doubt each other. That did not work. So hopefully we'll continue building these structures, and the main part for us right now, as I see it, is to maintain the unity so we don't start quarreling with each other and bickering. That the team we have would continue working. Humans who work together, they keep quarreling all the time. That's nature of human beings. Next question about a Moscow influence on this regime. There was a hope initially that there's a way to convince Moscow to not interfere, but there were people who raised their voices and said that Moscow essentially is the heart of darkness in this case, and they will be a hugest obstacle for Belarus. And they basically keep proving that they are that source of evil, going back to February 24th, when they attacked Ukraine. So they can still play a role, not in terms that they will favor you in any way, but there is actually a risk now that they may perhaps get rid of Lukashenko regime. What do you think about that possibility? What are your considerations about that regime from Moscow? They can probably do anything they want as long as they feel themselves in power. But this is a temporary stance. It will be over one day. I wanted to say that back in 2020, we wanted to resolve our internal Belarus crisis. We did not want any third party to interfere into our processes and leave us be. I don't know if your viewers know it, but back in the day in one of the interviews, I said the phrase that Putin probably understands what is going on. And it was my attempt to diplomatically impose on him, do not interfere with our business. But Svetlana, that did not work, right? No, it didn't. It is obvious now. It was naivete, as we can see it from now, to expect anything from them, anything like that. Now we, if anything, can really clearly see the role of Kremlin in Belarus. I'm not changing my position, and I understand that Kremlin did set its tentacles deep into the body of my country. And I understand that our previous appeal to Kremlin was very naive. But one should understand that a lot of Belarus people, just like me, we did not want to interfere in politics. We had a leader who was solving things for us, but after several generations change, even our younger people start to understand that Belarus can be a flourishing, successful country, which is way more appealing to its populace, and it doesn't need to have a strong authoritarian regime on top of it. And we also understand that without weakening of Kremlin, we cannot do much in Belarus. They need each other. Putin needs Lukashenko to show that he's not alone fighting with Ukraine, it's not his own initiative, and Lukashenko needs Putin to prop him up. All right. So if back in 2020 we did not have serious anti-Russian sentiments, our citizens' general attitude towards Russia was, let's try to stay friends. Now, with the start of the war, our people understand that they don't really need that war. They ask this question, why are we even in it? They want to build their future in a country that has a normal legal system. Now, Belarus people, if they need to leave or evade the repressions, they're not fleeing to Russia. Russia does not provide any sense of safety. And our people are fleeing to Europe. So it does change the feeling of understanding of the family we belong to. Are we part of the bigger European family, or are we going to continue to prop up that message about brotherly peoples? I don't know, Svetlana, if you follow us, follow our casts. I don't know if you do. We are pretty popular, and we have an advisor to the office of Ukrainian President, Alexei Arestovich. Some people are calling him a sex symbol. It doesn't seem to me like that. It's a more serious matter, and we decided to call him into this cast with you. So this is somewhat of an exprompt. And since we decided, okay, Alexei is a declared terrorist in Belarus. He kind of looks like one, I would say so. Second, he has Belarus roots. His family, his ancestors are from there. And we have about 18 minutes left in this stream, so perhaps he can chime in with some of his opinions too. We discussed about matters of this war, discussed matters of Lukashenko's position about it, so we have an opportunity to kind of split it between three of us and toss a few ideas around. I would like to hear your point of view on Lukashenko's participation in that war, and how would two peoples, Belarus and Ukrainian people, can overcome that difficult time. Are there any concerns, any beef between two peoples? What would you say about it? First of all, I would say hello, Svetlana. Glad to meet you virtually. Happy birthday, Mark. Yes, thank you. As for the core of it, I did say my opinions several times before. I think Belarus did not join that war against Ukraine because your people showed civilian bravery. There was a pressure from Moscow and Belarus all the time. And Belarus military was in fact preparing to conduct some military operation against Kiev, and there were other options for Belarus military to even cut Ukraine from Poland along the border. But Belarus military, down from the lower ranks to the officers, let Lukashenko know that at least 60% of them are seriously against this action. There was time when they tried to impress it upon Belarus army with pressure. They increased political workers representing regime 5 to 6 times. And people still declared their categorical no to that initiative. So from my point of view, one needs a lot of civilian courage, because these people were seriously risking. And it's always easier for a military person to say yes and go and attack, follow the orders, than to actually counter the order or counter the question about the order with the matter that Belarus army was created to defend Belarus people and not to participate in Russian wars. So we also had similar or related issues, because in Ukraine, on the background of Bucha and other things that were happening, there were some hotshots that wanted to conduct strikes and hits on the Russian targets in Belarus. Not on Belarus people, but on Russian targets in Belarus. And we had some means to do that. And those troops that actually were participating in Bucha, they did enter our territory from Belarus. And we managed to hold them. We convinced to not do it because we should not be killing anyone between our two peoples. Belarus people should not have it imprinted in their memory that Ukrainian soldiers killed somebody in there, be it a soldier or civilian. And there is always a risk, even if you're hitting any military target, they're usually next to civilians, and there's always a risk that a civilian who may end up dead or wounded. And in general, it's still basically using Ukrainian ammo on Belarus land. We don't think we need that. And these two, Belarus and Ukrainians, are actually looking like brotherly people. Poles are pretty close too, but Belarus, Poles, and Lithuanians is an interesting mix. And Ukrainians that we lived in under one rule for several hundreds of years. So we do have a history of relations. Our minister, I forgot his name, Kuleba, yes, Kuleba, thank you, Mark. So when they said there is a triplet of Poland, Ukraine, and Lithuania, we're waiting that for the fourth people, Belarus, because very often we were historically the four peoples that were together. So here I see the question differently. Putin wants to devour Belarus and make it a part of Russia, subjugate them to his own regime. And we also want Belarus to join us, but we want them to join us. We don't want to define their destiny for them. We want them to make the decisions. We want Kremlin to lose their power over that nation. And to allow military attacks by Ukrainian military, or air, missile, or land hits, we see that as an acceptable situation. So we stopped our military, and we understand that the regime is holding Belarus people hostages, and probably the worst would be to shoot the hostages. And we'll deal with Russians when they come through Belarus or from Russia, and we'll have to deal with them, and that's what happened. So, Svetlana, right now, in my understanding, Belarus is out of the danger zone for the most part, because it is just the base for Russian troops staging. Perhaps your power, your group has some influence on it, that Belarus didn't actually engage in a hot conflict. And we understand that it's good that Ukraine is not answering directly at Belarus with the retaliatory strikes. So do you think if Kiev might consider working with your group directly. Personally, I've always been a proponent of a good dialogue. Would be glad to talk to Ukrainian president and their office. Although on a working level, we do have some good relations. I understand President's cautious approach before the war, that he did have to pay care to how he addressed us, and if he could meet us. We understand that he had to be careful to manage the threat of backstabbing from Belarus territory if the war happens. But we still need to build trade and other relations in the future. And if it's not going to be me at some time, it could have been after the next elections in our country. But these contacts, I think we need them right now already. And I'd be glad to meet with Ukrainian president. I think it is a very honorable way that his life led him through, and our doors are always open for Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people. So perhaps sometime in the near future we'll get together. I really appreciate Alexei's words about their decisions. How did they come to conclusion to not attack Belarus? And I understand that some people may think that Belarus betrayed Ukraine. I do hope that most people understand that Lukashenko is a criminal regime that basically is using and abusing its own people for all the criminal purposes. And we, being exiled, we're doing our best to try to influence that and change the situation as much as we can. Alexei, what about you? Do you think that, I'm not talking about it today, but do you think that public event for Svetlana to come and visit Ukrainian president? And I understand it's theoretically you're not representing Zelensky's office, you're talking hypothetically as a private person. I do hope that this meeting will happen, because A, it will be beneficial, and it is a very complex situation now between Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. We don't know what Lukashenko will do if such a contact happens. So I understand it may happen later. Do you think he may fall into Putin's embrace? Yeah, he might get scared and decide that it's too risky and his military may just dismantle his regime, and there is a risk from Svetlana to come to the country and be inaugurated. So we don't know that risk. We don't know how they do it. Ukraine never recognized Lukashenko's right to represent Belarus people, but he is doing fictitious management of the country. This actually, in this situation, if it becomes threatening, that may push him towards Putin, to a much closer orbit. And as we discuss it now, I think both sides do understand the nuances of that approach. So the main approach here would be to not do no harm to Belarus situation. We cannot allow risk Belarus independence, which still is, even under this regime, but it nominally exists. And there is no real reason to risk that situation, because there are no benefits at the moment. And there are military risks, serious military risks to consider. But when the war is over and Russian troops are defeated in Ukraine, and then Putin's regime will become weaker and will start wavering, then there may be a lot more things happening. But again, from the point of view do no harm, we probably should not elaborate further on that. All right, Svetlana, we are approaching 53 minutes live. We have 40,000 people leaving us likes, several hundred people, 100,000 watching us. So using that podium, we have most of our audience in Ukraine, so you have a very unique opportunity to say something, to follow Alexei's words and see if you can produce an impression on our audience. Well, first of all, I would want to thank Ukrainian people, Ukrainian soldiers for their courage, because your courage inspires a lot of people. It inspires Belarus people, inspires the whole world. And the processes happening right now are the ones that Western countries could not even imagine a few months back. And I would wish you to have enough courage to continue and proceed with your course. Stay the course and never use "if we win." I always keep correcting journalists that I'm talking to. Do not even let the thought of you maybe losing that war creep into your mind. You are winning and you will win because you have enough courage and enough resources and enough spirit to do that. We as Belarus people trying to help you as much as we can. Unfortunately, we're very limited in what we can do, but we're still, believe me, we're still doing what we can. And I would also ask Belarus people to read deeper into the history of our two countries, and same with Ukrainian people. How are we connected historically? And without free Ukraine, there'll not be free Belarus, and without free Belarus, there'll not be safety for Ukraine. We need to support each other for a good future up ahead. Big thank you to Svetlana. Alexei, we thank you a lot. And I see you want another word. I want to dispel any speculations that Belarus cannot and they're incapable. Those speculations are made with a lack of vision or lack of information. In my opinion, Belarus people expressed a lot of courage back in the 20th during elections. They showed it during the aggression from Russia through Belarus onto Ukraine, because we were getting a lot of intel information from Belarus people who were supporting us with anything they could. And also what Svetlana mentioned, there was another partisan movement on the rails, for which Lukashenko actually started a criminal prosecution against me, criminal case against me. Personally, that was very effective. There was time when the average time for a rail rail cargo to pass through Belarus had increased fivefold. And that helped us to win the waiting game around Kiev, and we don't know how it would have unfolded had Russia had normal, nominal, full access to Belarus Railroad. So that's why I want to say that Belarus resistance played a historic role in defense of Kiev region and in successes of Ukraine troops in repelling Russian advancement in that area. There are people of huge courage, and they've been demonstrating it many times, and I think there'll be more opportunities for them to show that, so we're deeply appreciative of that. Dear friends, thank you. Thank you, Svetlana. We're not saying goodbye to you, Alexei. We'll have a cast soon. And thank you for all the viewers. We've had tens of thousands coming and going and watching us live, and I understand this is somewhat unplanned. It was a bit of a surprise, but please share links and irritate your politicians in Minsk and Moscow with this stream. Please follow that stream and subscribe to our channel. Svetlana, always glad to see you, always eager to see you on this channel. Thank you. Please keep inviting us. Glory to Ukraine. Long live Belarus.